Joining us. Let's get some perspective now on the plane crash, the tensions with Iran. The intelligence the administration said led to their decision. From Democratic Senator and U.S. presidential candidate Michael Bennet. He's well placed to talk about this as he sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Thank you, Senator, for being with us. First of all, I just want to get your quick reaction to these reports that intelligence agencies in the U.S., I understand also in Europe, increasingly believe the Iranians shot this plane out of the sky. What's your reaction to that?
I can't speak to the intelligence, but what I can say is that it sure seems increasingly likely that that's what happened.
And what do you think then should be the consequence of that?
Well, I think this obviously needs to be thought about in the context of the broader issues that we're having in the Middle East. I mean, I think the United States needs to not be in a reactive posture, push back because we're having public sentiment in the region galvanize around us, and I think that it's very important for us to assemble and marshal our allies across the region and outside the region to decide what we want our endpoint to be here with respect to Iran and in the region generally.
You were briefed on the intelligence that the administration says supported its action to take out Qasem Soleimani inside of Iraq. I know you can't talk about classified intelligence,
right,
but were you convinced that the strike was justified?
I'm convinced that Soleimani's death was justified. I'm not convinced that the strike was in the interest of the United States. You know, the Commander-in-Chief's job is to protect the American people, to protect us at home and in the Middle East and around the world. I'm unpersuaded that our posture today is better than the one that we were in before we attacked Soleimani. I think that, you know, the Iranians are playing a long game here, and I don't think Donald Trump understands the strategic implications of what he's done. I think he understands what the implications are for getting headlines, but not necessarily for supporting the long-term interests of the United States in the region or here. And I still am unconvinced that that it was the right thing to do.
And this is what Mike Lee, a senator yesterday in the United States from Utah, said about that intelligence briefing. I want our viewers to listen to that, and then I'll get your take on it.
What I found so distressing about that briefing was that one of the messages we received from the briefers was, do not debate, do not discuss the issue of the appropriateness of further military intervention against Iran. And that if you do, you'll be emboldening Iran.
Do you agree with Senator Lee on this point?
Well, I've been to some really terrible briefings in Washington, so I'm not sure that was the worst that I've ever been to. But I completely agree with the sentiment. I mean, here we've been in two wars, both of whom have lasted for almost 20 years. Our own War College has put a 2,000-page report out that says the winner of our Iraq War was Iran, which, by the way, completely contradicts what Donald Trump said, which is Iran's never won a war. They only win negotiations. They won the Iraq War, according to our own War College. We've spent almost 20 years in Afghanistan, and the most recent reports from the Washington Post, I think, are fairly convincing that after the first 6 months, we basically not only didn't achieve our objectives, we made matters worse with respect to corruption, with respect to drugs, with respect to the rise of the Taliban. So I think this is a moment when we need the United States Senate to exercise our constitutional prerogatives. And I think if Donald Trump tries to go to war with Iran without this Senate's involvement, he's going to find.
Do you think he would abide? Do you think the administration would abide by the terms of any war power resolution?
I don't have any idea. I don't have any idea. I think that this president is lawless. He's not committed to the rule of law. He doesn't believe in separation of powers. I get that. He doesn't believe in democracy. This is why it's so important that our system was designed the way that it was designed, and I believe we should conduct that oversight, and that the president should abide by the decision that we make.
Yeah, we're about a little more than 3 weeks away. Yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
Please go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to ask you about your campaign, because you're still running a Democratic candidate, even though your polling numbers for Iowa are under 1%, and New Hampshire, I think it's 2% around there. Why are you still in the race?
Well, 2%'s progress for me, and we're going to continue to work really hard over the next few weeks to have town hall after town hall after town hall in New Hampshire to see whether we can do better. The reason I'm still in the race is I am the only candidate in this race that's won 2 national elections in a swing state. Nobody else has. I'm running on a program that can galvanize not just Democrats, but also some of the 9 million people that voted twice for Barack Obama and once for Donald Trump. And I believe I'm the only candidate with hope. I have hope, but more important than that, I am absolutely convinced that for our kids' sake and for our grandkids' sake, Donald Trump must be a one-term president, and we need a president who actually, among other things, will abide by the rule of law and understands how important the alliances are in Europe and other places that this president has either taken for granted or has trashed.
If not you, who would you support? Which candidate would you back?
I'll talk to you about that if I drop out of the race. But this has important international implications because of his mishandling of Iran, his mishandling of North Korea, of Russia, and of China. I mean, these are all huge, big-ticket items that are going to set the agenda for the next generation of Americans, and that's a lot at stake.
We're seen and watched a lot, actually, in the Middle East and in Iran. What would you say to people in that part of the world, as a sitting U.S. senator, about what your hopes are for the region? If you're elected president, how would you handle things differently?
If I were elected president, what I would want to do is lead the community of nations into a much more peaceful era than the one that we've experienced over the last 10 years. I'd want to lead the United States away from the involvement that we've had in the Middle East that's been counterproductive to our own interests and counterproductive in the Middle East. And I think we need to build on the institutions in the Middle East that actually are working and are committed to the rule of law and see if we can make incremental progress. Nothing's going to happen overnight, but the United States can't do this by
So the polar
ourselves.
opposite of Donald Trump, it sounds like.
I would say that's my offering in New Hampshire is if you want somebody like Donald Trump, you're not going to vote for me. If you're looking for the opposite of Donald Trump, probably out of 330 million Americans, that's me.
All right, Michael Bennet, the Democratic senator.
Thank you.
For the senior Democratic senator from Colorado. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks
Still to
for
come
having me.
tonight, Iran.